Welcome back to Analysis, where we've been concentrating on events in Syria and the region. The reported increase in the military build-up in neighbouring Jordan has raised worries that the conflict could intensify the degree to which the war is a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran, as well as between the West and Russia. A number of states have contributed funds and equipment to the conflict, and military intervention has been spoken of many times. So what is the future for the conflict, considering the military build-up in Jordan, and will Russia's Crimea annexation cause the West to act in Syria? Well, joining Victoria Britton and I from the first half are Syrian opposition activist Mahami Kadaria, and on the line, Daud Abdullah, Director of the Middle East Monitor, and Alan George from King's College London. Victoria, welcome back. So do you think now that the kind of impulse which gave birth to the uprising in the first place has now been drowned in the interventions of various local and international powers?
Yes, without any doubt. I mean, the people who, first of all, started demonstrating peacefully for change in Syria have been completely drowned out by, as you say, all these external forces that have come in. And I notice you didn't mention the bombing today by Israel, which is, I think, an incredibly dangerous new development. Mohammed will know better than I, but if I were a Syrian Democrat who'd had a rather precise idea of reforming the country that country doesn't exist anymore. And I don't know how you get from the place that we're now in for the people on the ground to force the kind of political solution that people were talking about in the first half. It's not even on the table. And as you say, the Crimea events do, given the way the Americans have played it in such a ham-fisted way, do raise, of course, the spectre that they might wish to go further in Syria.
Mohammed, I mean, no doubt, many, perhaps the majority, if there were any such thing as a legitimate opinion poll of Syrians, would still want what they wanted at the beginning. But the trouble is the guns and the money aren't in their hands, and they're not running the revolution any longer, are they?
To be honest, we all know that who started the guns and who started the war wasn't the people who went out for freedom protests, who demanded freedom. It was the regime who started the killing, who started the bloodshed. He's the one who brought out the guns first. And, the people of Syria went out for 6-7 months. All they had was flowers and their voices to shout out for freedom. The regime came out, he brought out his guns, started killing, caused the bloodshed. We can't say, there has to be, a retaliation by these people. They can't see their father being killed or their son being killed and not do anything. Eventually there has to be something moving on the other hand, other than peacefulness. Guns play the role.
Do you think that some, Hatem Attia, for instance, and some other Syrian activists have said, however understandable the military response was to the repression, ultimately it was a mistake because it ended up, once you're in a war, the people with the money and the guns decide the policy.
Yeah, that's the problem we have in certain areas now in Syria, where warlords, we can say, are in control of these guns, of the money, etc. And the problem is, when we come talking about Russia and America, this proxy war was caused by the regime, because if he actually came and said, to the people, what do you want? I'll give you what you want. You want a bit of freedom, you want some democracy, maybe we'll do elections, free elections, then all this wouldn't have happened, and we wouldn't have seen all this proxy war, till 3 years now. The more weapons, the more warlords we see in Syria now.
Let me just bring Daud Abdullah in on that issue. Daud, how do you see this now? Do you? It seems to me that there was a kind of a halt brought on the drive to Western intervention by the vote in the Commons last week, but that now seems to be turning towards a more intensified operation to provide other people with weapons by other means. Is that how you read it?
No, not entirely. I think after the failure of the talks in Geneva, all the parties are now reassessing their positions and trying to create new strategies. Of course, a lot of fighters have left, not only because of the failure of the Geneva talks, but also because of the infighting within the various armed groups. Thousands have been killed, not by the Assad forces, but by this internecine fighting between opposition forces. So there's a whole process of realignment of forces on the ground. And I don't think that, the conflict or the crisis rather in the Ukraine is going to sort of intensify the Western intervention or hasten it in Syria. On the other hand, it may prove to be a distraction, but what it will do, the forces on the ground in Syria may battle it out for themselves without any direct influence or intervention from the West, because they would see it as an opportunity to seize ground. As we have seen, there's an escalation on the border with Lebanon in the Golan Heights in recent days. So the local forces are trying to battle it out themselves at the moment, seize the opportunity by this distraction in the Ukraine. In terms of the buildup of weapons, yes, there are reports of it, but still the hard evidence that weapons are coming through Jordan and the Americans are having a base there, etc. There's no hard evidence about this. Other reports suggest that some weapons are coming from Libya. There's a steady flow of weapons from the former regime that is coming into Syria. So that's where we are at the moment.
Okay, well, just let me ask Alan George about that. Alan, where do you think the weapons are coming from? Because as Dad says, there are a variety of different reports. Libya was described, the post-Gaddafi Libya has been described as an arms supermarket, some of which is getting into Syria. Obviously, we've had the reports of arms coming from the Saudis and across the Turkish border. What's your breakdown of where the weapons are coming from?
Well, there's no clear breakdown. Syria's borders barely exist. They're extremely porous. Certainly, many are coming through from Turkey, from Iraq, from Lebanon, also a major route. I'm not convinced that Jordan is actually a major arms route, I have to say. I'm a little bit surprised by the reports you refer to of a US or Western military build-up in Jordan. This was well reported about a year ago, in fact, and pushed particularly by the Iranian media, who wanted to create a scare story, basically, that the West was planning to invade or intervene in a big way in Syria. Personally, I wish that is what the West had done. Sadly, the West has essentially sat on its hands. And I agree very much with what Victoria said, that the people in the streets demanding democracy, human rights, all those good things have been sidelined entirely.
Victoria, do you think one of the reasons that process happened, of the sidelining of kind of a genuine revolutionary movement, was partly because in the very early days the West made a very big play for the FSA and for moulding the response of the FSA, and that was one of the things that began the kind of sort of auction of international influence in Syria?
Well, if you remember, the French in particular, but also the Americans, kept producing these nice gentlemen in suits who had been outside Syria for so many years as the alternative leadership, which was obviously completely ludicrous because they didn't have anything on the ground. And then they began to fight among themselves, and the French supported one and the Americans supported another. And all that incoherence that we were talking about before of the West, I think, has been very, very responsible for helping the chaos to become worse. And I'm sure that Mohammed would agree that when you look at the Syrian opposition now, you can't come up with, this is an alternative leadership.
What do you think about that? I mean, what did you think when those figures started emerging on the international stage? I mean, some of us who remember back to the Iraq conflict, remember the sudden appearance of Ahmed Chalabi as a sort of representative figure, and suddenly these people who've been living in Florida for the last 20 years appear.
Honestly, John, I mean, if the Syrians have came out and demanded for freedom without no intervention from no country in the world, they came out because, they've had enough of 50 years of oppression from this regime. They're not going to wait for a country to come and put someone in power and tell them he's the guy now you have to follow, or he's the guy who has to. It's not going to be like Iraq. They didn't
well, of course,
lose.
famously, it didn't work in Iraq.
Exactly, and they didn't go out for all these 3 years and lost all these lives and all the martyrs till now from 3 years. And for someone to come and tell them, here's the next guy for you to follow, or for him to lead you. The Syrians went out for freedom. They will keep on fighting until they will get this freedom. It doesn't matter if America and Russia have a game in play. It doesn't matter if Saudi and Iran have a game to play in Syria. Personally, as a Syrian, I would want all these countries to leave Syria alone. The Syrians know what they want. They came out for the freedom they wanted. They will reach that freedom. The only problem we're having now as Syrians is this story of intervention that everyone's playing around and
well,
going around in the media.
Let me just put that to Alan George, because Alan George was just saying, that he wished the West had intervened. But very many Syrians, who have lots of other differences, have that point of view, Alan, that it would have been better if the lot of them had kept out, including the West.
Well, it's very easy to blame foreign intervention. I'm afraid you have to look at the realities on the ground. Syria is a very divided society, a very divided country. In fact, it always has been a society with many, many variations within it. I think it's unsurprising that there should be the sharp differences in the opposition which have now emerged so clearly. And I think the foreign intervention, whether from jihadists or from Qatar or Saudi or Iran or from Hezbollah, simply aggravates and underlines the existing divisions within the country. This is not a homogenous country. It never has been.
Dowd, you were saying, about the conflict spreading, and you said to the borders, but actually now it's spread well beyond that, hasn't it? Because, I mean, the bombings actually inside Lebanon are obviously deeply connected with this. So this is, we have the Israelis responding to attacks on or reported attacks on the Golan Heights. So it's got way past the point of seeping over the border, hasn't it?
Certainly. In the last week, there have been at least 4 Israeli attacks on the Israelis in the Golan Heights. Today, the Syrians closed the northern border with Lebanon, and there's a lot of military activity in the Bekaa Valley. So it has, the recent weeks in Lebanon itself, the amount of bombings in Tripoli and in South Beirut is indicative of the spread of the conflict to Lebanon. And in fact, what the reports are suggesting is that a lot of the Salafists, are taking the fight over into Lebanon to confront Hezbollah in its own territory. So this is, part of the dilemma that the country faces. However, I wanted to bring another point into the equation, and that was the fragmentation of the territory. Because you have so many different groups, controlling various areas, what we are seeing is the gradual fragmentation of the country in geographic terms, and this does not bode well for the future.
Indeed. Let me just stop you there, because I want to move on to just one more topic before we close, Victoria, and that's the impact on civil liberties here. We've seen the government, now much more strenuously warning about this. We've seen the threat to arrest people. We've seen the actual arrest of people, and famously, the most famous of them being Mozambique, which I know that you're very involved with. So, what's your take on this aspect of it now?
Well, I was very happy to hear from your earlier colleague that he had successfully taken a convoy to Turkey, delivered all sorts of goods, got inside Syria, handed it over, and come back without any problems. But as you said in the introduction, there have been all these warnings from high government officials here, and indeed a number of arrests, including the 3 in Birmingham. I think it's important that your listeners remember that the police actually said that those 3 people who were arrested did not constitute any threat to Britain. So they were somehow being arrested under terrorism laws, but they didn't, according to the police, constitute a threat. And the two who have so far applied for bail were given bail. So, of course...
But not Mozam yet.
Well, he hasn't, only because he hasn't applied for bail. And I think it's important to, obviously, because of contempt of court, nobody can speak about what may be behind these very, very serious charges that they're facing. But the fact that the mother and the student's son got bail, the judge granted them bail, and the police did not object to that, I think, well, it has to wait and be tested. But I think what that has done, those particular 3 arrests in Birmingham, and to a lesser extent, but also importantly in London, it has put a lot of fear around. And I don't agree with the speaker who said that people should not give individual aid. They should give it all through DAC or UN and so on. You know, people in the Muslim community are so moved by the horrors that, of course, they want to do something. And I think it's great that we're the kind of society where people do want to do something. And when you have a well-organized person doing the kind of convoys that he spoke about from Human Aid, I think that's great. And I would be very sad if people felt that they couldn't do that because there's some nebulous fear that it's going to be somehow put as terrorism. And if you look at the American parallel, the Americans who've got 65-year sentences for what's called material support to terrorism, because, I'm thinking of the Holy Land Foundation, because they gave aid to widows and children in Gaza, because the United States has said Hamas is a terrorist, so that becomes terrorism. I would be very sad if I thought that we were going to go down that particular road, because I think the effect that it will have on that large community in Britain is very dramatic, and we can't, as a society, we can't afford that.
OK. Well, I'm afraid that's where we're going to have to leave the discussion for this week. We've tried to look at the international, the domestic civil liberties, the international effect of the Syria conflict. There will be much more where that come from before the end of the day, I'm sure. And we'll be looking at it and following it on future editions of Analysis. So do rejoin us, and thank you for watching.